a car. We're going to Tucson. And I love spending time with them, just like I am sad about the following story. I was working with some folks, and a lady came up to me and she said, "We got to do something." And I said, "Why?" She says, "I miss my neighbors." She said, "I miss my Republican neighbors. We can't talk anymore. We can't talk anymore because the divisiveness that the extreme version of the Republican Party has put forward has forced us to isolate from our neighbors."
That's right.
It makes it so difficult to just walk down the street or walk into the grocery store. We're like on pins and needles in our own communities. Now down here in LD18, it may not be too tough because you don't get a lot of those red baseball caps. But trust me, if you live in a lot of other parts of Arizona, it's a little rough. And I've been to places in Payson, in Bullhead, in Sierra Vista, and all over the state where they say at gatherings like this, "Gosh, I didn't know there were more Democrats around here." And I said, "Well, you got to ask. We got to reach out. But we've been isolated from one another, and we've got to stop that. We got to stop that by doing the things that you were asked to do, by knocking on the doors and talking to your friends and talking to your neighbors, because they're not all that bad. In fact, most of them are still human. Most of them still have a sense of humor as well.
I haven't heard.
And we can reach out to them, and it's our duty to do so, because we are just as American as they are.
Amen.
We are just as much a part of the greater fabric of our society as they are. And that fabric is critical because the threads of it are represented right here. Business, law, technology, medicine, the arts and sciences, education. You pick that sector, it's represented somewhere in here. But the golden thread that runs through the fabric of that society and holds it together is elections. Elections are, forgive me, Chevy trucks, elections are the real heartbeat of America. Elections are that regular pulse, that regular discourse that we engage in. We have the conversation out in public about who our leaders are going to be, what policies are going to move us forward, how we are going to maintain our civil society. Elections are that regular pulse, that process, that due process that the body politic deserves. And there are forces out there who want to upset elections. They want to pull that golden thread right out and decide for themselves who your leaders are. That's authoritarianism. They want to decide for themselves who wins elections. They want to decide for themselves and not include you. And that neo-fascism that has arisen in the United States of America needs to be rendered asunder, and we are the ones who are going to make sure that all of that goes away. Because if we allow them to pull that golden thread out, the entire fabric of our society will disintegrate. That's our task. That's the moment that we have before us. Generations before have faced crucial times. They have faced difficulty. We have experienced civil war here in this nation, and we have survived. But this isn't that kind of a question. This is something far more sinister. This is the disintegration of civil society itself. The disbelief that they would inject into each of us as against the other. Think about what election fraud, voter fraud, stop the steal really means. Think about who that attack is against. I did not completely administer every single aspect of Maricopa County's 2020 election. Sure, I was the recorder and the chief administrator, but I wasn't at every vote center. I didn't do all of the ballot tabulation. I didn't drive the trucks, move the ballots, verify all the signatures. There were thousands and thousands of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents who did that. And when people like Mark Fincham say they were fraud, they're not blaming me, they're blaming you. They're blaming your neighbors. They're blaming their own fellow Americans. They are dividing us one against the other with zero evidence whatsoever, and they're doing it for the benefit of one person. And that's not American.
That's right.
That's not just un-American, it's anti-American. And so when your fellow Americans talk to you about these sorts of things, ask them which individuals they saw, which piece of evidence they know of, which reality they have experienced themselves that puts them in the position to be able to call that sort of a foul. It doesn't exist. It is a fantasy. It is a fantasy. It is falseness. And what we have now is an entire people who have gone through an entire very difficult period of time. This nation has been wandering and moving forward. And now a good chunk of us are worshiping at the foot of the golden calf of a lie. And the rest of us have to come down from the mountain with the truth, and we have to crush that golden calf. We have to restore faith that Americans have in Americans, that we have in one another. Because that lady that I talked to should not be missing the chance to speak with her Republican friend. She should be scheduling that next coffee or that next glass of wine with her Republican friend, because we are Americans before we are partisans, and we cannot lose that spirit. Now, as your Secretary of State, there are several things that I'd like to do. First and foremost, I'd like to make sure that every single one of our 15 counties has a Secretary of State that knows what questions to ask when going all the way around the state to see what resources are necessary to improve not just our tabulation systems and the IT security on the inside, but how we can best communicate with the voters in their counties to make sure that every eligible voter has the information that they need to get out there and exercise that fundamental right. We need a Secretary of State who has actually been a county recorder, which is the registrar of voters. Why? Because the voter registration system statewide is held at the Secretary's office. You know we've never had a county recorder as Secretary of State? Yeah, wow. We've also never had a Marine Corps veteran as Secretary of State. Semper Fidelis to everybody out there who served. We've also never had a Secretary of State who starts at day one as a certified election and registration administrator. My CIRA certification comes from Auburn University and the Election Center in Katy, Texas. I went through that because I wanted to be a good election administrator. And as a professional, then, I could speak with some authority and at least know which questions to ask. Say nothing of one of the most challenging jobs that I've ever held in my entire life, and one of the most rewarding. Being a father of 3 teenage girls is no easy subject, you guys. Thanks. Thank you. They don't mind being the butt of a joke once in a while. Builds character, girls. Builds character. Folks, I'll tell you what, this is incredibly serious business, but we have to proceed with love. We have to proceed with humor. We have to proceed with grace. And we have to recognize the human dignity that each of us carries inside of us, because we're all made of the same stuff. And at the end of the day, I miss my Republican friends too. And sometimes facetiously, but also with a bit of sincerity. I call my Republican friends friends. Because if I call them enemies, then I'm no better than they are. If I call them enemies, I'm no better than they are. And if I don't address my opponent the way I did in that debate as sir and mister, then I'm no better than he is. I'm no better than their name calling is. And sure, after a couple drinks at the house, you might hear just a little bit of a different set of vocabulary out of me. But at the end of the day, we need to be responsible for ourselves and our actions. This is why our system is good. This is why our system works. Our democracy is not broken. Our democracy does not have holes and flaws. Our democracy was intended to be run by people with honor and people with integrity. And what we find is that there are people who dishonor their offices, or dishonor the offices they want to be in, or who lack the sufficient integrity to be able to run these offices as intended, as we expect, in fulfillment of the oath of that office. We can't afford to do that. And I've proven that I have that honor and that integrity. In mid-November of 2020, when it became statistically impossible for me to win re-election in Maricopa County. Remember, I was running that election and on the ballot. But when it became statistically impossible for me to win, and it was the narrowest of margin, my ego must tell you. The narrowest of margins. What did I do? I didn't complain. I didn't complain out loud anyway. I called my Republican opponent, Stephen Richer. I congratulated him on his victory, and I invited him down to have a tour of his new office, because that's the way American power is transferred, peacefully and with respect and with dignity. And as I lived that example, so I pledge to you, I will live the example of the kind of Secretary of State that Arizona deserves. Our motto is God gives. But what we do with those gifts is up to us. There are 10 little 2-letter words that reflect that idea that I heard from a World War II veteran once. Not my grandfather, although that would make for a better story. And these 10 little 2-letter words are exemplified by the good people who've been knocking on doors, who've been organizing these events, who've been running for office like so many of our candidates out here. These 10 little 2-letter words are the words that each and every single one of us must say to ourselves. And we must repeat this mantra if we are going to make it happen. The 10 little 2-letter words should drive us. Just like the spirit that you feel right now motivates you, this will put it into action. Those 10 little 2-letter words are simple. If it is to be, it is up to me. If it is to be, it is up to me. Say it to yourself right now. Say it with me. If it is to be, it is up to me. Remember that.